Welcome and thank you for joining us. Quite often the universities, they have a frequent communication with members of staff and students, and they are sending these emails where they check how people are doing, and also they want to show that they're on top of things. So sometimes they do also comment on current affairs. For example, in the summer, we academics would get a lot of emails about Black Lives Matter and how the universities are sharing these values and all that stuff, and many things about COVID. So in one of these emails, because it was the talk of the day, in one of the emails that King's College London sent to students and staff, at some point it mentioned something about the late Prince Phillips. Prince Phillips had died some days ago. So at some point there was a remark about his institutional links with the university and something like a very short obituary, and it included a picture. Now, as you've probably seen in the news or on Twitter yesterday, this became a big thing. Some group of students or one anti-racist committee or something, they claimed that this was harmful. The word's very interesting, harmful. And of course, King's College London, they couldn't take any chances. They apologized for the harm caused by showing Prince Philip. Now, this is very easy to turn into a ridicule and say, oh, this is you snowflakery and all that stuff. But it also triggers some discussion about what is happening in universities and what is the political climate in universities and what are the ideas that are relevant in universities. So what I'm going to do today is not going to do, the daily objective today is not going to be about that event itself. But that event gives us a very good opportunity to talk about the left-wing bias, if there is one in university, and the kind of ideas that are prevalent in universities today. So, first of all, is the fact that most people in universities adhere to a particular point of view, which tends to be left-leaning, and it tends to bring with it anything that is considered to go hand in hand with this left-leaning view. Nowadays, of course, it's this sensitivity about racism or about not very sensitive claims that Prince Phillips has made. But is this left bias something new? And the answer is, of course, not. In the 40s, for example, we had Friedrich Hayek writing about intellectuals and socialism and pointing to the issue that intellectuals of the left have a much stronger presence in educational institutions, but also in opinion-making institutions. Then in the 50s and the 60s, particularly in the 60s, we have Ayn Rand writing about the Kompratikos, or many of the first essays in The Return of the Primitive is dealing exactly with this issue, which is what is happening in our universities. And then in the 80s, we have Dr. Peikoff writing The Assault from the Ivory Tower. In the 90s, we have Peter Schwartz talking about multiculturalism and how these ideas came along. So this is not a new issue. It is not a new issue, though, does not mean that the problem has not become, or the issue has not become worse. So let us take a look in the past. Let us go back to 1964. How does an average university look in 1964? So we have some pieces of research from then, and in the UK, we find out that around 35% of UK academics, a bit more than 1 in 3, would vote for the Conservative Party. So 1 in 3 academics in the 60s in the UK would self-identify as conservatives. And 47% would self-identify as supporting the Labour Party. So you would have this issue that Hayek pointed our attention to, that there are more left-leaning people in university, but the gap was not that big. We're talking about a gap of around 10%. So not something completely out of the ordinary. Let's jump a quarter of a century later. Let's jump to 1989. So now we find ourselves after almost 10 years of ruling of the country by Margaret Thatcher. So how have the universities changed? In 1989, the percentage of people who self-identify as conservatives goes from 35% to 18%. So now people who are towards the right fall from 1 to 3 to 1 in 5. And what is the situation today? Today, the situation is that people who identify being towards the right, Tories or other parties, maybe UKIP or the Brexit party, are less than 12%. Less than 12%. According to other pieces of research, less than 9%. So 1964, 1 in 3, more than 1 in 3 academics would say, I'm somewhere towards the right. Nowadays, less than 1 in 10 would say, I am towards the right. And today, we see that 46% would say that they're closer to the Labour Party, but also a big percentage say that they're voting for the Green Party, which also has, let's say, left-leaning politics. There's also a percentage which is with the Liberal Democrats, which in some ways are closer to the Labour Party. In other ways, they're more liberal economically. But people who say I'm towards the right is not more than 9%. So what we've seen is that this gap has widened. What about other issues that have divided the UK society? Almost 50-50. And an example, the obvious example is Brexit. 52% leave, 48% remain. How is this population split translated in the voting, how academics voted on Brexit? There, according to Times Higher Education, the percentage of people who answered this question and said, I voted for leave is less than 1 in 5. So in society, 52% voted for leave. Within academia, this percentage is much, much lower. And I have some interesting stories about the Brexit time. It was a very interesting time to work in a university. The thing I remember was there was this one person in the university, in the building I was in, and it was a huge building, who somehow from our discussing about the Greek financial crisis, had figured out that I'm a bit skeptical of the European Union. He wouldn't dare ask me if I'm for leave, because he wouldn't ask these kind of things. But he would sense that I'm a bit skeptical. So one day, close to the referendum, he said, come to me, I want to tell you something. So he goes to a room, he closes the door. I started to, oh, that's a bit weird. What's happened here? So he says in a very low voice, do you think Brexit has any chances? And he says, I don't want to say this out loud because no one else in this building is voting for Brexit. So that was the atmosphere in an academic institution during Brexit. And also remember that the day after the Brexit vote, I was in Berkeley campus in San Francisco for a conference. And there were hundreds and hundreds of academics. It was a very big conference. And of course, as you can understand, the mood was, it would be the equivalent of leaving the Maracanã, or it wasn't the Maracanã, that stadium when Brazil lost 7-1 to Germany, and you'd see the faces of the Brazilian fans. That was the equivalent atmosphere in Berkeley the day after Brexit. And at some point, there was supposed to be this discussion and say, let's have a follow-up, let's say public agora discussion to see what happened there. And someone asked from the mics or something, is there anyone who voted for Brexit? Please come forward because we need to find one person to be the pro-Brexit side. So I said, okay, I'll come forward. I was the only person out of these hundreds of people who would claim that they were in favor of Brexit, but the discussion did not happen, and actually this was for the best. So closing the Brexit parenthesis. Now, what else do we see in, I talked about the UK. What about the United States? Someone could say, look, don't give us the balance between Republicans and Democrats, because the Republicans had the freak show for candidates for the last years, Trump, so it wouldn't be accurate. Therefore, let's forget Trump. Let's go back to the good old days, the days of George W. Bush, that nowadays, for many, even Democrats, he was this paragon of stability and this paragon of seriousness. So what do we see in a research done among 1,500 American academics in the Bush years. So we haven't got yet the crazy guy Trump. We're still within the Bush years. So we have only 9% of faculty members, only 9% identifying as Republicans. And someone would say, but what about these fields that are filled with right-wingers, with neoliberals? Isn't this what the left is telling us? That business, for example, and economic schools are full of these market fundamentalists. Let's check it out. In business school, less than 30% of faculty members would identify as being with the right. Going to 2016, the ratio of liberal to conservative, liberal with the American sense, members of staff is 11 to 1. 11 to 1 in an average corridor in one of the 40 best American universities. What about in economics, where again, we are told that our students are being taught market fundamentalism, where the ratio there is 4.5 to 1, 4.5 Democrats for 1 Republican. What about history? In history, if you walk in a corridor in a history department, if you bump to 34 people, odds are that all these 34 would identify as being more towards the left, more towards the Democratic Party. And for every 34 people you find who identifies more with the left or the center left, you find 1 who identifies with the right or the center right. Why is this very interesting? Because if you've spent 2 minutes in a university, you will have noticed that one of their biggest mantras is diversity. Universities are talking all the time around diversity. And the elephant in the room is that there is no diversity in terms of the people who are teaching there. And what is also very interesting is, if you point is the explanations that the average leftist academics or the average people who are leaning towards the left are going to give you about this lack of diversity. So I'm encouraging our audience to go and watch out a very interesting, or something that I find interesting, a video which is called LSC, London School of Economics, LSC Sociology. Are there any right-wing sociologists? So in a moment of bravery, and hats off to London School of Economics, they did a short research among their members of staff asking why there are there any right-wing sociologists? And if not, why not? And it's very interesting to listen to the answers of the members of staff. They're very skeptical, they're very cautious, but some of them give some sort of explanation. Where we in sociology are more, interested in structures, in society, whereas the right-wingers are not interested in these things. Or you might find other people, not in this video, but other people saying, look, the average leftist is a bit of higher IQ. Therefore, this is why they end up more in academia. But nowadays, IQ is not anymore, you cannot claim IQ studies. So this argument is not very prevalent today. So the new argument is that they're a bit more educated, except that if you follow pieces of research that try to measure these things, you will not see a correlation that says if you're a left, you're more interested in acquiring higher education or higher levels of education, or that you're more clever or whatever. So it's very interesting that if you would point out one area where we don't see this kind of gap, where we see a gap, let's say, of 5–10%, and we say that, let's say, one particular group is misrepresented, we would have committees, we would have white papers trying to figure out what is happening here. Here we have this very simple explanation that says, oh, it's the type of people who do the right-wingers are a particular type of people. That's why you don't find them in academia. And again, things were always a bit skewed towards that side. But can you imagine that 6–7 decades ago, actually when sociology became a department in Berkeley, the first chairman of sociology in Berkeley was a conservative, Robert Nisbet, a conservative sociologist. Of course, no one is teaching Robert Nisbet today because it's a conservative and we cannot do that. But there was a time that you could be the chairman of sociology in Berkeley and be a conservative. And this wasn't like in the pre-revolutionary era This was in the 50s, and yeah, a time that is now seen so far away in the past. And again, notice one more thing. All these numbers and these statistics I've given you are in the era before the culture wars became so prevalent in the universities. This is the era before the summer of 2020, where we've seen cancellations in universities and all that stuff. This is the era before most of the things that we've heard happening in university. So these are most of these statistics that I present you are from the days when things are quieter in the public sphere. Now, we've established that there is an issue. We've established that there is an issue of one type of political leaning. But does this create a bias? Because we could say, no, this does not create a bias, because these people are very fair. So for every Marx they put in the reading list, you're going to find a Hayek. For every Piketty, you're going to find a Friedman. Of course, this is not the case. So what is very interesting is that if you think about it, how were ideas that used to be fringe and today are not fringe and today are dominating our intellectual life? And one example, which is very prevalent, is critical race theory. How did this theory become so mainstream? Where did this start? It obviously started in the universities. But notice, this is not a grand plan. This is where many conservatives go wrong. They see universities as these training grounds for like young radicals. And in a way they are, in a way they are not. So it makes sense that if you're a member of staff, you will try to teach more stuff that you agree with. So for example, when I teach globalization, I will include Deirdre McCluskey. Actually, I will start with Deirdre McCluskey. When I teach about progress, I would start with Matt Ridley. But in the same way, of course, I will add in the reading list also voices from the other side. Not everyone is doing this. So in the same way, you will see people adding in the reading list, for example, Owen Jones. You probably know Owen Jones, the journalist and author of the left in the UK. Now, could you imagine Ben Shapiro being in a reading list in a university? You cannot. And yet Owen Jones is in many reading lists. And he has written a book about the demonization of working class called Chaps. It's an interesting book. I'm not saying it should not be in any reading list. But the thing is, if anyone dares to say, oh, then we should also put Ben Shapiro because he has written a good book about, let's say, left-wing bias in education, that would be completely unthinkable. I remember a bright economic student telling me that he could not find the book of at least two very famous Nobel laureates in the library of his university, and it was one of the biggest libraries in the countries, but he could find the books of Laurie Penny, a radical leftist and feminist. Again, I'm not saying there should be no Laurie Penny in a university. People should be free to teach whatever they want. What I'm pointing out is that this would be the equivalent of having, I don't know, of having Andrew Breitbart in a university. But of course, that would be completely unthinkable. We'd probably even have protests. Anyway, so this is how it manifests. Another way it manifests is what are the types of modules that are taught. And particularly in social sciences, you will find a lot of modules that are almost direct, something that resembling a training for someone to be an activist. You will find modules with titles such as, and this was with a quick Googling, activism and social movements, social justice and education, social justice practice, power, sex and the body, Black humanities, global queer subjectivity, Black intellectual thought. So you're seeing that there is a very, very particular worldview there. And again, I'm not one of these people who say these things should not be taught. What I'm saying is you're not going to find much about, for example, I don't know, a defense of free markets or a defense of individualism. And this is not because, again, there's this huge conspiracy that prevents us. This is because, though, this atmosphere creates what I called institutional bias. So when our friends in the left talk about institutional racism, what do they mean? They mean there's this environment that even if racism is not a conscious plan, it flourishes because it finds fertile ground. And in a way, I claim this actually happens with left-wing ideas in the university through various ways. One is what type of grant, research grant, you can get. When you have more and more universities having to commit to values such as sustainability, equity, and all these buzzwords that today are considered obvious, but politically they're not neutral, of course your research will have to go towards that direction. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds per grant. So imagine how much money is going to this type of research. Or think about the policies that universities have, for example, in terms of, in order to get money from the government, you have to show that you do now also some type of giving back to society, that you have an impact. That's the term, impact. And there's no easier way to show impact than linking it to these values. So even if the people in the university do not have a concise plan that, look, I want to enforce, actually not to enforce, I want to accelerate, I want to make more prevalent this worldview, this almost happens organically. And of course, in another area is publications. Again, when the vast majority in academic journals are of one particular point of view, try to publish something about Ayn Rand or about Hayek in a social science journal. Now, to be fair, once I managed to publish something on Hayek, but half the journal then had to be also on Foucault. So, and again, this is not a plan, but if one peer reviewer sees Ayn Rand, it's like, wait, why do I care? All I know is that she's this bad person, she's not relevant, she's not a real philosopher, leave me alone. Anyway, so what are the final thoughts on all this? Where does this leave us? So, is this a conscious takeover? No. Are these people like the revolution guards of leftism in universities? Again, the answer is no. Most of these people just want to go home in the evening, have a good day, productive day, do some work, do what they believe is good, and let it be. And that's why I've said many times that personally I haven't had problems in academia. Most of my colleagues are great, we have a great relationship. But this is not the case. This is not the issue. The issue is not that you have these conscious Marxists that are radicalizing the youth. The point is that this institution, that is the academia, is now, because it's reflecting the views of society out there, it could not be anything else. There is no alternative universe where living in a society where the quote right has no ideas of its own that are worth fighting the ideas of the left, where the right basically agrees with the moral premises of the left, where the right mostly agrees with the role of the state. Why would universities be anything different? And yet, despite the fact that this is not a conscious endeavor, this is still very important. Why? Because the universities are preparing the opinion makers of tomorrow, the administrators of tomorrow. And we're seeing already the effects. We see already that the people who go, even in big business, in human resources, in social media, or they go and work in things that have to do with journalism, with the media, they consider these views self-evident. They have this worldview which is around the idea that any difference in outcomes is an example perhaps of discrimination, or inequality means that the state needs, inequality of outcomes mean that the state needs to intervene, or that you are your brother's keepers and also the keeper of the environment and the future generation. All these things are considered self-evident because, again, who is questioning them out there? So how did we expect that the university would be something different? So we have this spiral. The culture out there is making even the moderates in universities adhere to these views. And at the same time, the universities that adhere to these views are giving the culture its opinion makers and the teachers of tomorrow. And this is how we find ourselves in this feedback loop. Is there any way to solve this? I think the answer is clearly no. I don't think there's any way that the university actually can be saved from this situation that it finds itself in. What it needs is a huge shock, and this shock should be a disruptor in education, something like whatever Uber was the equivalent for education. And I really hope that this is something that through technology, it shouldn't be that far away. My experience with this was that I got a lot of value, for example, from Ayn Rand Institute's academic program, the Objectivist Academic Center. Now, I saw the other day that Ayn Rand Institute is, there is this new project which is called Fellowship in Conceptual Education. So if you are in the newsletter of ARI, you've received this email. So due to the generosity of some donors, they're trying to fund education projects where it thinks students to think conceptually from a very early age. Because that's another thing. If the student has not got the tools from early on to question ideas, of course, again, everything that is served to them, every politically biased view that is served to them, they're gonna chew it. And again, who is to blame them? You have to be an intellectual giant today to say, well, everyone around me thinks that this is the good view. Who am I to go to the other side? So this is where we find ourselves. And that's why I think the system is not reformable. You will see conservatives trying to impose new guidelines about free speech, like a state-imposed free speech in education, or maybe they're going to impose some quotas where for every 10 members of staff, you're going to have one who is slightly on the right. So maybe that one person will not want electric cars being mandatory, let's say from 2035, but from 2040, or not from 2030, from 2035, because that's basically the big and fundamental existential difference between the Tories and Labour in this country. But anyway, so I don't think there's any solution to this problem, and I don't think there is any way to fix it. Okay, I see we have some super chats, and thank you very much for that. So Bonnie says, maybe independent thinkers on the right were out making money instead of fighting the left in universities, who grew by default. This is one of the arguments that people on the right use, that, as they say, those who cannot do teach. This might very well be the case, but this does nothing to alleviate the problem. The fact that we have completely, and I don't mean the right, but I mean people who don't like what is happening in the universities, the fact that we said, well, that's how it is, and leave it as it is. What has this brought to is that these ideas that used to be, I mean, think about critical race theory. It used to be an obscure and radical view within a social science department. So you would have a social science department, and within that department, there would be this fringe view. And this fringe view within 2 decades, now you see it everywhere in big business and in media, and this is how ideas work. So yes, maybe it is the case that many people are actually giving up on the idea that there's any value to be gained in universities, brings this result. And of course, I'm not saying that you should sacrifice yourself and go become a professor to fight the good fight. Don't do that. It's going to be soul destroying. And to be honest, again, I don't see much future for this level of, for this type of higher education. But anyway, okay, many thanks to Jeff, Marilyn, and Jonathan. So Marilyn says, Thomas Sowell is an economist who has written a lot about sociology. Did he ever teach sociology? So very interesting point, Marilyn. Sociology used to be a wider field. So Hayek considered himself a sociologist. Even Mises considered himself a sociologist. Thomas Sowell is not taught in any sociology curriculum I've seen. I try to give some of his books. So I ordered his books in the library, but it's not part of a sociology curriculum. Thomas Sowell was mostly a professor in economic schools, as far as I know. His work is 100% sociological, no disagreement with that. And if sociology took itself seriously, it should at least provide soul as, look, there's this obscure guy who has a different view. We probably disagree, but maybe you should see what he's saying. Universities are gatekeepers for certification, says Ashley. Of course they are. But who is to blame for that? So when the government in the UK is spending millions and millions and millions and millions to persuade every school student that your future is to go to universities, of course, more and more people will do that. And again, we live in times where you can go to websites and for free find, like, I don't agree with them, obviously, on many things, but you can go on Mises.org and find almost the entirety of knowledge on economics, or at least in Austrian economics. You can go, let's not go far, you can go to Ayn Rand's Institute campus and you can find the history of philosophy and the history of everything about objectives for free. So, of course, this is not going to give you the credentials that a university degree is giving you today to the eyes of most of society. But when it comes to, I think, the people who count, if I were an employer today, the first thing I would check would not be whether you have a university degree. Marilyn says, Glenn Lowry teaches some sociology. I'll check him out. I don't know much about Glenn Lowry. And Robert says, outstanding. It's clear this is a war of ideas. Yes. And to paraphrase that meme with the astronauts that have no idea what it means, it always has been. It always has been a war of ideas. But today, what has changed is that today it's very evident that we're losing. Very, very evident that we're losing. So that will be it. So here's the issue. Normally, I would say we jump to Clubhouse. Razi, am I allowed today to not have a Clubhouse because we have to start preparing for Yaron? Or do you want me to have a 5-10 minutes Clubhouse? 10 minutes Clubhouse. Okay, we'll go for 10 minutes to Clubhouse to see if people have to contribute, but 15 to we have to call it a day because it's the Yaron event. So today we have the third discussion on the issue of the third discussion in the series Yaron Debates Europe. First topic was Marxism, second topic was tradition. Today he's discussing the issue of religion. And his debater, his sparring partner, so to speak, is Georgia Gilholm. So Georgia is a student who is close, let's say, to the ideas of freedom, but also she's religious. So let's see what this discussion between Yaron and Georgia will bring about. 7 o'clock in 25 minutes, Ayn Rand Center UK's YouTube channel. So have we got anything else? Also today, what we're gonna see is that we have a perk for you, for our viewers, as a thank you. You get a part of the first communication bootcamp with Don Walkie. So communication bootcamp is a program which is available only to members, only to ARC UK members. But we thought that's so much value that we need to show the world what type of stuff we're talking about. So our team has cropped a part of the first session, and it's going to be available premiering at 8:15 in ARC UK's channel, again, for you to see what is happening and hopefully to be persuaded that it's worth it becoming a member. First of all, because it helps us do more, it helps us fight this battle of ideas. As you said, Robert, it is a war on ideas and we need to start winning. But also you get all these perks. So this Sunday we had the Productivity Hub on how to win friends and influence people by Dale Carnegie. And even if you didn't show up, I prepared a 68-page booklet with the main takeaways from the book and the main examples seen from an objectivist point of view, or including scenes from Ayn Rand's novels and examining how they relate to the themes of the book. So basically, so many reasons to become a member. AynRandCenter.co.uk/membership. See you soon in Clubhouse for 8-10 minutes. See you in 20 minutes for the Yaron debate number 3. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.